Hello everyone, welcome to The Green Man for another one of my favourite Shoegaze and Dreampop album videos. This is episode number 4, following on from my last one, which was covering Slowdive's debut album Just For A Day, and this time round I'm covering another debut album. This time we're jumping forwards to the year 2010, and this was Wild Nothing's debut release of Gemini, released via Captured Tracks label. The album was 12 tracks and about 42 minutes in length. And Wild Nothing are the kind of bands, I think, when I often hear comments about them or hear people talk about them, they will draw comparisons to lots of other bands from the 80s perhaps. I would say the Smiths, maybe Joy Division a bit, Cocteau Twins, lots of these 80s kind of dream pop, sort of jangle pop kind of bands, indie pop, whatever label you want to give them. And there is certainly a sound here which does make you think this sounds a very familiar kind of music. But at the same time, this album is so pleasant to listen to, it's so nostalgic. I really like Jack Tatum's voice and how this works with the music. And one thing, if you're going to compare these guys to the Smiths, one thing I would say that I actually prefer to the Smiths, controversial though this might sound, because I know there's a lot of Morrissey lovers out there, right? Morrissey is a great songwriter, don't get me wrong, but Jack Tatum's voice I find slightly easier to listen to than someone like Morrissey and to get used to, and I think that actually makes the melodies here and everything else really kind of shine even more. Just from a musical kind of standpoint, everything is nicely kind of I just really like the sounds that Wild Nothing achieved with this album, even though, as I say, it's reminiscent perhaps of these other bands that everyone will make comparisons to. But the songwriting here is pretty good. I mean, you've got some amazing lyrics in this album. I think of the opening track, Live in Dreams, where he sings, "Our lips won't last forever, and that's exactly why I'd rather live in dreams and I'd rather die." And that sort of image or that thought that you're at a point you just or you've sort of got that feeling where you just want to live in your dreams. You don't want to kind of be in reality because your dreams seem better than that reality. And the song is appropriately very dreamy, romantic sounding and beautiful, and it's the kind of track, once you've heard it, what a way to open this album as well. It's extremely addicting, I think, this kind of track. And the rest of the album continues in a similar sort of vein. We get tracks like Summer Holiday, Drifter to follow on, which are again really nice kind of sounding. Again, these indie pop, jangle pop kind of tracks. Oh Lilac is a track I love. Kind of like the understatedness of this album as well, that it's not a kind of shoegaze album that's at all, I think, kind of in your face, or doesn't feel like it's got any ego behind this album or anything. It just feels really natural, and I think the production's pretty good on here, and it just really evokes that nostalgic kind of sound, but just the kind of album that works so well for quieter, reflective times, as I tend to say in these shoegaze album videos, dream pop videos. I would say perhaps my two absolute favourite tracks are towards the end of this album though, and one is Chinatown. Great beat to it. One of the more, perhaps happier, slightly more upbeat tracks on this album. And then Gemini, the closer, is really top-notch, I think, stuff. And the way this finishes this album off, you have a kind of looping rhythm. So already the track's been good with the way it's worked through. It's kind of 2 or 3 different rhythms in this track, different melodies, but the last one, the last kind of loop, that last looping bar of music that you get, which lasts a couple of minutes, you could think, well, God, I'm getting bored of that. But actually, the more you listen to that loop, the more you enjoy this track, this Gemini track. And I just can't hear enough of it. Even now, it's a go-to track for me. I have to put it back on. At first I thought, my first impression of this track was, oh, okay, that's a little repetitive, but now I just can't stop listening to that riff, that bar of music even, that just repeats. And I think it's the subtle vocal phrases of the subtle vocal parts towards the end of the track that Jack Tatum is adding in, I think, here and there, and just making it even more, kind of adding more beauty to an already kind of beautiful part of this song. And it just tops off for me a really, really good dream pop album, indie pop. Really just fabulous stuff. And I think this band, you know, for me, they've done other albums since this album, but this one I think remains my favourite of theirs. I did really like Nocturnes, which was the album that came out a couple of years after this one. Everything since then I haven't quite gotten as much into, but I know there's potential for that to change with a lot of albums over time. You know, we can always change our kind of views of them, but for me still this remains the album that I love the most from Wild Nothing, I think. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this sort of look back on one of my favourite shoegaze and dream pop albums from Wild Nothing. If you haven't listened to this album before and you kind of like shoegaze and dream pop stuff, you know, this really sort of dreamy sounding, nostalgic sounding music, check this one out. Definitely listen to this album. Come back to me and hopefully you'll come back with like positive feedback as to how much you enjoyed it, because this was one of those albums I listened to quite a lot during the lockdowns, the pandemic, and it became a bit of a kind of regular visit during those lockdowns. Thanks everybody for watching. As always, do feel free to like and subscribe. I do album reviews, ranking lists, ranking the albums. I also talk about fantasy, sci-fi and horror, TV, books, films, you name it. And I will see you next time. Take care everybody.